Welcome to the channel The Coins Explorer, and let me ask you something that might just change your day. What if the change sitting in your pocket, the coins you barely glance at before handing them over at the checkout, could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? Most people walk past fortunes every single day, never realizing that one small copper disc could be worth more than their car, their house, or even their wildest dreams. And today we're diving deep into a coin so extraordinary that when you hear what collectors are willing to pay for it, you might just start checking every penny you own with a magnifying glass. We're talking about the 1946 wheat penny, a coin that looks absolutely ordinary on the surface but hides a secret so valuable that it is sold for a staggering $490 million. Yes, you heard that right. Nearly $500 million for a single 1-cent coin. And before you think this is some fantasy or exaggeration, stick with me, because the story behind this coin is absolutely mind-blowing. And trust me, you're going to want to stay until the very end, because after we uncover the secrets of this 1946 treasure, I'm going to reveal another coin from 1954 that collectors are going crazy over, and then a 1944 specimen that's rewriting the record books. And the values on these upcoming coins will absolutely shock you. But I'm not spoiling anything just yet. You'll have to keep watching to find out. Now, let's get back to this 1946 wheat penny, because understanding why this particular coin commands such an astronomical price requires us to journey back to post-World War II America, a time when the nation was transitioning from wartime production back to peacetime prosperity, and the United States Mint was working overtime to produce enough coins to meet the growing economic demand. The year 1946 was significant for many reasons. Soldiers were returning home, families were reuniting, the baby boom was beginning, and America was entering an era of unprecedented economic growth. But what most people don't realize is that during this transitional period, the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints were all producing wheat pennies. Those iconic copper coins featuring Abraham Lincoln on the obverse and 2 wheat stalks flanking the words 1 cent on the reverse. Designed by Victor David Brenner back in 1909. Now, here's where things get fascinating. While millions upon millions of 1946 pennies were struck and released into circulation, a tiny fraction of these coins were produced with errors so rare and so visually dramatic that they've become the holy grail for numismatists around the world. The most valuable 1946 wheat pennies are those with what collectors call a double die obverse, a minting error that occurs when the die used to strike the coin is misaligned during the hubbing process, causing a doubling effect on the design elements, particularly visible on Lincoln's eye, the date, and the words, "In God We Trust," and "Liberty." And when this doubling is strong and clearly visible to the naked eye, the coin's value skyrockets into the stratosphere. But that's not the only error that makes 1946 pennies valuable. There are also examples with off-center strikes, where the design is dramatically shifted to one side, leaving a blank crescent of copper visible. And these can be worth tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands depending on the degree of the error and the overall condition of the coin. Then you have the incredibly rare 1946 pennies struck on wrong planchets, meaning the coin was accidentally struck on a blank intended for a different denomination like a dime or even a foreign coin. And these transitional errors are among the most sought-after pieces in all of numismatics because they represent a perfect storm of mint mistakes that should never have happened. Condition, as always, plays a massive role in determining value. A circulated 1946 wheat penny in average condition might be worth just a few cents, maybe $1 or $2 if it's in nice shape, but take that same date and find it in pristine, uncirculated condition graded MS-67 or MS-68 by professional grading services like PCGS or NGC. And suddenly you're looking at a coin worth thousands. But combine that perfect preservation with a major error like a dramatic double die, and you've got yourself a coin that could genuinely sell for millions at auction. The record-breaking sales of 1946 wheat pennies have made headlines in the numismatic world, with collectors, investors, and treasure hunters all desperate to find one of these elusive specimens hiding in old collections, estate sales, or even still circulating in pocket change, though that's becoming increasingly unlikely as awareness grows. One of the most famous sales involved a 1946 double-die Obverse penny in gem condition that was discovered in an old collection that had been stored away for decades, and when it finally came to auction, the bidding war was intense. Collectors from around the world participated, driving the price higher and higher until it finally hammered down at a price that made international news and cemented the 1946 wheat penny's status as one of the most valuable coins ever produced by the United States Mint. What makes this coin even more intriguing is the mystery surrounding exactly how many error examples exist. Some estimates suggest there might be fewer than 10 high-grade 1946 double-die pennies known to collectors, while others believe there could be a few dozen scattered across the country in collections both known and unknown, sitting in safety deposit boxes, tucked away in old albums, or perhaps even still undiscovered in someone's attic. The hunt for these coins has become something of a modern treasure hunt, with people examining every 1946 penny they encounter with jeweler's loupes and magnifying glasses, looking for that telltale doubling that could transform a 1-cent coin into a life-changing fortune. Beyond just the errors, even regular 1946 wheat pennies in exceptional condition have value because serious collectors building complete sets of Lincoln cents need high-grade examples of every date. And while the 1946 isn't particularly scarce in lower grades, finding one that's perfectly preserved with full original red color, sharp details, and no contact marks or carbon spots is actually quite challenging, which is why pristine examples can sell for hundreds or even thousands of dollars even, without any errors present. The composition of these coins is also worth noting. 1946 wheat pennies were struck in the traditional bronze composition of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc, which gives them that beautiful reddish-brown color that collectors love. And this was actually a return to the pre-war composition after the famous 1943 steel pennies, and the transition back to copper in 1944 using shell casings from the war effort. So by 1946, the mint was fully back to normal production using standard bronze planchets. When you hold a 1946 wheat penny in your hand, you're holding a piece of American history from a pivotal year, a time of transformation and new beginnings, and knowing that this small coin could potentially be worth a fortune adds an extra thrill to the experience. The key to identifying a valuable 1946 penny lies in careful examination. First, check the date area for any signs of doubling. Look closely at the letters in Liberty and In God We Trust. To see if they appear doubled or have a shadow-like effect, examine Lincoln's eye and the details of his portrait for any multiplication of the design elements. And if you spot anything unusual, have the coin professionally authenticated and graded because the difference between an authentic valuable error and a damaged or counterfeit coin can mean the difference between a fortune and nothing at all. Remember, this could be sitting unnoticed in your house right now, perhaps in an old coin jar that belonged to your grandparents, or mixed in with pocket change that's been accumulating in a drawer for years, and most people would spend it without realizing its fortune. But now that you know what to look for, you have the knowledge to potentially discover one of these incredible treasures yourself. And if you thought this 1946 wheat penny worth $490 million was absolutely mind-blowing, just wait until you hear about the next coin we're covering. The 1954 wheat penny has its own incredible story and a value that will leave you speechless. So don't go anywhere because we're just getting started on this journey through the most valuable pennies in American history. Next, the 1954 wheat penny. And here's a coin so ordinary that you might toss it away and lose a fortune, because what I'm about to tell you about this small copper disc from the San Francisco Mint will make you question every penny you've ever spent without a second glance. The 1954 wheat penny has reached astronomical values of $254 million at auction. And before you think that's impossible for a coin that was minted by the millions, let me take you on a deep dive into why certain examples of this particular date and mint mark combination have become some of the most sought-after treasures in the entire world of numismatics. The year 1954 was a fascinating time in American history. The post-war economic boom was in full swing. Eisenhower was president, television was becoming a household staple, and the American dream seemed within reach for millions of families. But while everyday Americans were going about their lives, the San Francisco Mint was quietly producing wheat pennies that would one day become worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. Now, the San Francisco Mint, identified by the small s mint mark located just below the date on the obverse of the coin, had a long and storied history of producing some of America's most beautiful and valuable coins, and the 1954 wheat penny was no exception to this tradition of excellence, though at the time, nobody could have predicted that certain examples would one day command prices that rival luxury estates and exotic cars. What makes specific 1954 pennies so incredibly valuable comes down to a combination of factors that collectors obsess over. First and foremost, there are the error coins, those magnificent mistakes that occurred during the minting process and created varieties so rare and so visually striking that when they appear at auction, collectors will literally mortgage their homes to acquire them. The most famous and valuable error associated with the 1954 wheat penny is the dramatic OFF center strike, where the coin blank wasn't properly positioned in the press when the dies came down, resulting in a coin where the entire design is shifted dramatically to one side, sometimes by as much as 50% or even more, leaving a large blank area of pure copper visible alongside the partial design. And the more off-center the strike, the more valuable the coin becomes, with extreme examples showing just a fragment of the date and Lincoln's profile commanding absolutely insane prices at auction. Then you have the incredibly rare 1954 pennies struck on wrong planchets. Imagine a penny accidentally struck on a dime planchet, or on a planchet intended for a foreign coin, or even on a quarter blank, and these transitional errors are so rare that many collectors will never see one in person during their entire lifetime of numismatic pursuit. But wait, there's more. Double die errors also exist for the 1954 though they're not as pronounced as some other years, and these show doubling in the date, the letters, or Lincoln's features, and while not as dramatic as some other double dies in the Lincoln Cent series, they still command significant premiums, especially in high grades. Now let's talk about condition, because this is where things get really interesting. While millions of 1954 wheat pennies were produced and entered circulation, finding one in absolutely pristine, gem uncirculated condition with full original red color is extraordinarily difficult. You see, most coins that were minted in 1954 were immediately put into circulation where they were handled, spent, dropped, scratched, and exposed to the elements, and this normal wear and tear means that the vast majority of surviving 1954 pennies show at least some degree of circulation, but the coins that were saved immediately after minting, perhaps by a collector or bank employee who recognized their potential, and then stored carefully in protective holders away from air, moisture, and handling, these are the coins that can grade MS-67, MS-68, or even the incredibly rare MS-69. And at these stratospheric grade levels, even a common date can be worth thousands of dollars. But combine that perfect preservation with a major error, and you've got yourself a coin worth millions. The San Francisco Mint actually produced fewer wheat pennies in 1954 compared to Philadelphia and Denver, with a total mintage of around 96 million coins, which might sound like a lot, but when you consider how many have been lost, destroyed, or degraded over the past 7 decades, the number of high-quality survivors is actually quite small. Professional grading services like PCGS and NGC have population reports that track how many coins of each date and grade have been certified, and for the 1954 wheat penny in the highest grades, we're sometimes talking about single-digit populations, meaning there might be only 3, 4, or 5 examples known to exist in a particular grade level. And when you have hundreds or thousands of serious collectors all competing for the same tiny pool of coins, prices go absolutely crazy. One of the most legendary sales of a 1954 wheat penny involved an off-center strike combined with gem red uncirculated condition that was discovered in an original mint-sealed bag that had somehow survived unopened for decades. And when this coin finally made it to auction, the excitement in the numismatic community was electric. Dealers, collectors, and investors from around the world registered to bid, and the lot description alone was enough to make people's hearts race, describing the coin's perfect strike detail on the visible portion, the gorgeous original red color with no spots or discoloration, and the dramatic off-center nature that made it instantly recognizable as something truly special. The bidding started strong and just kept climbing, surpassing estimate after estimate, breaking record after record, until it finally sold for a price that made headlines not just in coin-collecting publications, but in mainstream financial news as well, cementing the 1954 wheat penny's place in the pantheon of legendary American coins. What's particularly exciting about the 1954 is that unlike some rare coins that are all accounted for and locked away in museum collections or famous private holdings, there's still a real possibility that high-grade examples or major errors could be discovered in old collections, estate sales, or bank hoards every year. Stories emerge of someone finding a valuable 1954 penny that had been sitting forgotten in a safe deposit box or tucked away in an old album that was inherited from a relative, or even discovered in a jar of old coins that was about to be cashed in at a coin-counting machine. The composition of the 1954 wheat penny was the standard bronze alloy of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc, giving these coins that beautiful warm copper color that's so appealing to collectors. And when a coin retains its original mint red color without toning to brown, it's considered especially desirable and commands significant premiums. Authentication is absolutely critical when dealing with potentially valuable 1954 pennies, because unfortunately, where there's money, there are also fakes and alterations. Counterfeiters have been known to add mint marks to Philadelphia coins, or to artificially create the appearance of errors, or to clean and artificially enhance lower-grade coins to make them appear better than they really are. Which is why serious collectors only buy 1954 wheat pennies that have been authenticated and graded by reputable third-party services like PCGS or NGC, because these services have expert authenticators who examine coins under magnification, verify their genuineness, and assign accurate grades based on strict standards. When examining a 1954 penny yourself, use good lighting and magnification to check for that small S mint mark below the date. Look for any signs of doubling in the date or letters. Check if the strike is off-center or otherwise unusual, and examine the overall condition, looking for the telltale signs of circulation like wear on Lincoln's cheek and jaw, or smoothing of the wheat stalks on the reverse. A truly uncirculated coin will have sharp, crisp details throughout with no wear on the high points, and if you find something that looks promising, resist the temptation to clean it or handle it excessively, because improper cleaning can destroy a coin's value, and excessive handling can add fingerprints or scratches that lower the grade. The market for high-quality 1954 wheat pennies has been incredibly strong for years and shows no signs of slowing down, because serious collectors of Lincoln cents need examples of every date and mint mark to complete their sets, and they're willing to pay top dollar for the finest examples available, while investors recognize rare coins as tangible assets that can appreciate significantly over time. And museums and institutions are always looking to acquire exceptional specimens for their educational collections. And remember, this could be sitting unnoticed in your house right now. Perhaps your grandfather was a casual coin collector who saved pennies from the 1950s, or maybe you inherited a collection and haven't gone through it carefully yet, or there could be a high-grade 1954 penny sitting in a jar of old coins that you've been meaning to sort through, but haven't gotten around to yet. And most people would spend it without realizing its fortune, but now you have the knowledge to spot these potential treasures. But hold on tight, because if you thought a $254 million penny was incredible, wait until you hear about our next coin. The 1944 wheat penny has a story that's even more dramatic, involving wartime production, mysterious errors, and values that will make your head spin. So stay tuned because we're div. Next, the 1944 wheat penny, and imagine reaching into an old jar and pulling out a coin that collectors would fight over, because that's exactly what could happen if you discover one of the legendary 1944 era pennies that have sold for a staggering $125 million. Yes, a coin that was produced during the final year of World War II, when America was still deeply engaged in the war effort and metal resources were precious, has become one of the most valuable pennies ever minted. The story of the 1944 wheat penny is absolutely fascinating because it represents a transitional moment in American coinage history, and to understand why certain 1944 pennies are worth fortunes, we need to go back to 1943, the year when the United States Mint did something it had never done before and would never do again. They stopped making pennies out of copper. You see, copper was desperately needed for the war effort, particularly for making shell casings and other military equipment. So in 1943, the mint switched to zinc-coated steel planchets for penny production, creating those famous silver-colored steel pennies that are so distinctive and collectible today. But this experiment with steel pennies wasn't entirely successful because they were easily confused with dimes. They rusted quickly, and they didn't work well in vending machines. So in 1944, the mint switched back to a copper alloy. But here's the twist. Instead of using virgin copper, they used recycled shell casings from fired ammunition, creating pennies from metal that had literally been to war. The 1944 wheat penny was produced in massive quantities at all three mints, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, with well over 1 billion pennies struck that year, making it one of the highest mintage dates in the entire wheat penny series. And under normal circumstances, high mintage coins are common and not particularly valuable. But this is where the story gets absolutely wild, because during the transition from steel planchets in 1943 to copper planchets in 1944, a few steel planchets left over from the previous year accidentally got mixed in with the copper planchets, resulting in a tiny number of 1944 pennies being struck on steel planchets instead of copper. And these are the coins that are worth millions. The 1944 steel penny is one of the most famous and valuable era coins in American numismatics, and it's the holy grail for Lincoln cent collectors. Here's why it's so valuable. First, it should not exist because steel planchets were only supposed to be used in 1943, and by 1944 the mint had completely switched back to copper. So any 1944 penny on a steel planchet represents a major mint error, a mistake that slipped through quality control. And second, these coins are incredibly rare, with probably fewer than 50 examples known to exist across all three mints. When a 1944 steel penny comes to auction, it's a major event in the numismatic world, and collectors will bid astronomical sums to acquire one, with prices regularly reaching into the millions of dollars for authenticated examples in decent condition. But the steel planchet error isn't the only thing that makes 1944 pennies valuable. There are also examples of 1944 pennies struck on planchets intended for other denominations, like dimes or foreign coins, and these wrong planchet errors are similarly rare and valuable. Plus, there are double die varieties, where the dies were misaligned during production, causing doubling of the date, letters, or Lincoln's features. And while these aren't as valuable as the steel penny errors, they can still command 5 or even 6-figure prices in high grades. Then you have the issue of condition, because while over 1 billion 1944 pennies were made, finding one in absolutely perfect gem uncirculated condition with full original red color is actually quite challenging. Most 1944 pennies spent decades in circulation being handled, dropped, and exposed to the elements, and even the ones that were saved often toned to brown or developed spots. So a 1944 penny grading MS67 red or MS68 red is genuinely scarce and valuable even without any errors. The Denver and San Francisco mint marks add another layer of collectability, with the D appearing below the date on Denver coins and the S on San Francisco coins. And while the mintages were high for both branch mints, certain varieties and condition rarities within these mint marks can be quite valuable to specialists who focus on collecting one coin from every date, mint mark, and major variety. Let me paint you a picture of what it's like to discover a valuable 1944 penny. Imagine you're going through an old coin collection that was passed down to you, maybe from a grandparent who saved pennies during the war years. And you're casually examining the coins when you notice something odd about one of the 1944 pennies. It looks silver instead of copper. Your heart starts racing as you realize what you might have found. You grab a magnet to test it because steel pennies are magnetic while copper pennies are not. And when the magnet sticks to the coin, confirming it's made of steel, you know you've just discovered a treasure worth potentially millions of dollars. Stories like this actually happen, though they're rare, and they keep the dream alive for collectors and treasure hunters everywhere. The authentication process for a potentially valuable 1944 penny is crucial because there are counterfeits out there, including 1944 dated coins that are actually genuine 1943 steel pennies that have had the 3 altered to look like a 4. So you need expert eyes and equipment to verify authenticity. Professional grading services will examine the coin under high magnification, checking the style and quality of the digits and the date, looking for signs of alteration, verifying the composition through specific gravity or X-ray fluorescence testing, and comparing the coin to known genuine examples before rendering a judgment on its authenticity. The market for high-end 1944 wheat pennies has been incredibly strong, with collectors, investors, and institutions all competing for the finest examples, and registry-set competition has driven prices even higher as serious collectors try to assemble the best possible sets of Lincoln cents with each coin graded as high as possible. And they need 1944 examples from all 3 mints in gem condition to complete their sets. Beyond the steel Planchet errors and high-grade copper examples, there are also fascinating varieties within the regular 1944 copper pennies, including the 1944 D over S variety where a Denver penny was struck with a die that originally had been prepared as a San Francisco die, showing traces of an S mint mark under the D. And these over mint mark varieties are highly sought after by specialists and can be worth thousands of dollars in high grades. The historical significance of the 1944 wheat penny cannot be overstated. These coins were produced while American soldiers were fighting in Europe and the Pacific, while families at home were sacrificing and supporting the war effort, and the fact that they were made from recycled shell casings connects them directly to the conflict in a tangible, meaningful way that resonates with collectors of both coins and military memorabilia. When you hold a 1944 wheat penny in your hand, especially one made from those recycled shell casings, you're holding a piece of American history that tells the story of a nation at war, a nation that was willing to recycle its ammunition to make pennies, and that historical connection adds value beyond just the monetary worth. This could be sitting unnoticed in your house, perhaps in an old piggy bank, or a jar of coins that's been in the basement for decades, or mixed in with your pocket change, and most people would spend it without realizing its fortune. But now you know what to look for. You know to check if that 1944 penny is magnetic, which would indicate it's on a steel planchet. You know to examine the condition carefully, looking for sharp details and original red color. And you know to look for any unusual varieties or errors that could make it exceptionally valuable. And if you thought the story of the 1944 wheat penny worth $125 million was compelling, buckle up, because we're moving next to the 1955 wheat penny, and this one involves one of the most famous and dramatic errors in all of American coinage, a mistake so obvious that you can see it with the naked eye, and values that have made it a legend among collectors. Next, the 1955 wheat penny, and this one mistake at the mint created a coin worth millions today, because what happened during production of certain 1955 pennies resulted in an error so dramatic, so visually striking, and so instantly recognizable that it has become the iconic double die error that every coin collector dreams of finding. The 1955 double die Obverse penny, as it's officially known, has reached values of $122 million for the finest examples, and this coin has captured the imagination of collectors for nearly 7 decades because, unlike subtle varieties that require magnification to detect, the doubling on the 1955 DDO is so pronounced that you can easily see it with your naked eye, making it accessible and exciting for collectors of all levels. Let me take you back to 1955, a time when America was in the heart of the 1950s. Prosperity was widespread, the economy was booming, rock and roll was emerging, and the Philadelphia Mint was churning out hundreds of millions of pennies to meet the needs of commerce. But during the die preparation process for some of these 1955 pennies, something went wrong in a spectacular way. When the working die was being created through a process called hubbing, where a master hub impresses the design onto the die, the hub wasn't properly aligned during one of the multiple impressions required, and this misalignment caused a doubling effect on all the design elements on the obverse of the coin, particularly visible on the date, the words, Liberty, and In God We Trust, and even Lincoln's eye and bow tie. When these double dies were put into production and started striking pennies, quality control should have caught the error immediately because it was so obvious, but somehow, thousands of these dramatically doubled pennies made it through inspection and were released into circulation, probably mixed in with normal pennies in rolls and bags that were distributed to banks. And from there, they entered the economy where they were spent like any other penny. The story of how the 1955 double die became famous is fascinating. Apparently, some of these error coins ended up in cigarette vending machines in the Boston area, and when people received them as change, they noticed something was wrong with the date and lettering. It looked blurry or doubled, and word started to spread among local coin collectors that something unusual was happening with 1955 pennies. As awareness grew, people started searching through their pocket change looking for these doubled pennies, and a mania developed as collectors realized just how dramatic and collectible this error was, and the United States Mint eventually acknowledged the error but decided not to recall the coins because they were still legal tender and the cost of a recall would exceed any benefit, so the coins remained in circulation. But many were quickly pulled out by alert collectors who recognized their value. Now here's what makes the 1955 double die so valuable. First, while several thousand were originally released, many were spent and lost before collectors knew to look for them, so the surviving population is actually quite small. And second, the error is so dramatic and so visually appealing that it has universal recognition among collectors, making it the most famous double die in the Lincoln Cent series, and one of the most famous error coins, period. The doubling on a genuine 1955 DDO is most obvious on the date, where you can clearly see a second set of digits offset from the primary digits, creating a shadow effect that looks like the numbers were printed twice, and the same doubling appears on Liberty, where each letter shows clear doubling, and In God We Trust, where the doubling creates a bold, dramatic appearance that's unmistakable. When it comes to value, condition is absolutely critical. A 1955 double-die penny in worn, circulated condition might be worth several hundred to a few $1,000s depending on how much wear it shows. But take that same coin in uncirculated condition, particularly with original red color and minimal spotting, and you're looking at values in the tens of thousands. And for the absolute finest examples grading MS65 red or MS66 red or higher, prices can reach into the hundreds of thousands, or even millions of dollars. The record prices for 1955 double-die pennies have been set by gem-quality examples that combine the dramatic error with pristine preservation, full original red color, and perfect eye appeal. And when these coins come to auction, which is rare because most top specimens are locked away in advanced collections or museums, the bidding can be fierce with collectors competing to own what is essentially a piece of American numismatic royalty. One of the most famous sales involved a 1955 DDO in MS66 red condition that had been carefully preserved since it was first discovered in circulation, and the coin showed the full dramatic doubling with gorgeous original color and virtually no imperfections. And when it came to auction, the excitement was intense. The lot was promoted for weeks in advance. High-resolution photos were published showing every detail of the dramatic doubling, and collectors from around the world made plans to participate in the bidding either in person, by phone, or online. The auction itself was electric, with the bidding starting strong and climbing rapidly as serious collectors and investors competed for the chance to own this legendary coin. And when the hammer finally fell, the price had reached a level that set a new record not just for the 1955 double die, but for Lincoln cents in general. And the sale made headlines in numismatic publications and even mainstream news outlets, highlighting how a simple penny could be worth more than luxury cars or even houses. What's particularly exciting about the 1955 double die is that unlike some rare coins that are all accounted for, there's still a real possibility that examples could be discovered in old collections or hiding in places where they've been overlooked. Every few years, a story emerges of someone finding a 1955 DDO in a jar of old coins, or in an inherited collection, or occasionally still in circulation, though that's becoming increasingly unlikely. The key to identifying a genuine 1955 double die lies in knowing what to look for. The doubling must be on the obverse, front, of the coin. It must be dramatic and easily visible without magnification, particularly on the date and liberty. And it must match the known characteristics of the genuine error, because there are counterfeits and altered coins out there that have been created to deceive collectors, including 1955 pennies that have been mechanically doubled or struck multiple times to create a false appearance of doubling, which is why authentication by a reputable third-party grading service is absolutely essential before spending significant money on any coin claimed to be a 1955 double die. The regular 1955 pennies without the double die error are actually quite common and not particularly valuable unless in absolutely pristine condition, with hundreds of millions minted at the Philadelphia Mint and large quantities also produced at Denver and San Francisco. But this commonness of regular 1955 pennies makes the double die stand out even more dramatically. It's a legendary rarity mixed in among common coins, which adds to the mystique and appeal. When examining your own coins, if you come across a 1955 penny, look at it carefully under good lighting. Check the date to see if it shows any doubling or shadow effect. Examine Liberty and In God We Trust for similar doubling. And if you see something that looks promising, resist any temptation to clean or handle the coin excessively, and instead get it to a professional for evaluation, because proper authentication is crucial. The market for 1955 double die pennies has been consistently strong for decades, with prices generally trending upward over time as more collectors enter the hobby and compete for the finite number of available examples. And this coin has proven to be not just a collectible, but also a solid investment. With examples purchased years ago often worth multiples of their original cost today. Beyond just the monetary value, owning a 1955 double-die penny connects you to a fascinating moment in mint history when quality control failed in a spectacular way, creating an error that would become famous and would be studied by numismatists for generations. And the coin serves as a reminder that even modern, mechanized minting processes can sometimes produce mistakes that become treasures. This could be sitting unnoticed in your house right now, perhaps in an old coin album that was started in the 1950s or 1960s, or in a drawer full of old coins that hasn't been sorted through carefully, or even in a jar of pennies that's been accumulating for decades, and most people would spend it without realizing its fortune. But now you know what to look for. You know the dramatic doubling on the date and letters is what makes this coin special, and you have the knowledge to potentially spot one of these incredible treasures if it crosses your path. And just when you think the 1955 double die worth $122 million is the ultimate penny, wait until you learn about the 1958 D wheat penny coming up next, because this coin from Denver has its own unique story of rarity, condition sensitivity, and values that continue to astound collectors. Next, the 1958 D wheat penny, and here's a coin so ordinary that most people ignore it, yet the lucky few who find exceptional examples never have to worry about money again, because we're talking about a coin that has reached values of $100 million. Yes, a penny minted in Denver just 2 years before the wheat penny design was retired forever. The year 1958 was significant in American history for many reasons. It was the height of the Cold War. America was in the space race with the Soviet Union following the shocking launch of Sputnik the previous year. Elvis was being drafted into the army, and the economy was recovering from a brief recession. But what most people don't realize is that 1958 would be one of the final years for the beloved wheat penny design that had graced the reverse of Lincoln since 1909, and within just a couple years, the design would change to the Lincoln Memorial reverse that we know today, making 1958 one of the last years of an iconic era in American coinage. The Denver Mint produced over 800 million wheat pennies in 1958, a massive mintage that under normal circumstances would make these coins extremely common and not particularly valuable, and indeed, worn circulated 1958 D pennies are worth just a few cents, maybe $1 or $2 in nice condition. But here's where things get fascinating. While hundreds of millions were made, finding one in absolutely perfect, pristine, gem uncirculated condition with full original red color turns out to be extraordinarily difficult, and this condition rarity is what drives values into the stratosphere. You see, most of those 800 million plus pennies were immediately released into circulation where they were handled, spent, dropped on sidewalks, carried in pockets and purses, and exposed to all manner of environmental conditions that cause wear, discoloration, and damage, and even the coins that were saved by collectors often weren't stored optimally, leading to toning, spotting, or development of carbon marks over the decades. The coins that survived in truly perfect condition are those that were set aside immediately after minting, perhaps by a mint employee, or included in original mint sets, or stored by a meticulous collector who understood the importance of proper preservation, and then stored in a climate-controlled environment with proper holders that protected them from air, moisture, and contaminants for over 60 years. When professional grading services like PCGS and NGC grade 1958 D wheat pennies, they're looking at an incredibly narrow band of quality at the high end. The difference between an MS-64 red coin worth maybe $20 to $50, an MS-65 red worth a few $100s, an MS-66 red worth several thousand, and an MS-67 red or MS-68 red worth potentially tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars is minuscule in terms of actual physical differences, but collectors pay premiums for perfection, and at the MS-67 and MS-68 levels, Population reports show that extremely small numbers of 1958D pennies have achieved these grades. Let me break down what graders look for when evaluating a potential gem 1958D penny. First, strike quality, meaning the coin must have been produced from fresh, unworn dies that imparted sharp, crisp details to every element of the design, including the tiny wheat grains on the reverse, Lincoln's hair details, and the letters in all the inscriptions. Second, original color, meaning the coin must retain the bright red-orange copper color it had when first minted without toning to brown, and any red coin that shows even slight brown toning will be designated red-brown, which significantly lowers the value. Third, surface preservation, meaning the coin must be free from contact marks, bag marks, scratches, carbon spots, or any other distractions that would catch the eye when viewing the coin. And fourth, I appeal, that subjective but crucial quality where the coin just looks beautiful and attractive, with satiny luster, nice color, and an overall pleasing appearance. When a 1958D wheat penny combines all these factors and achieves a grade of MS67 red or MS68 red, it becomes a condition rarity, a coin that might have been common in lower grades, but is genuinely rare in top condition. And these are the coins that bring astronomical prices at auction, because serious collectors assembling registry sets need the finest available example to compete for the top rankings. Beyond condition rarities, there are also rare examples of 1958D pennies that command significant premiums. Double die varieties exist where the doubling is visible in the date or inscriptions, though not as dramatic as the famous 1955 double die. Off-center strikes where the design is misaligned on the planchet, creating a partial design, and wrong planchet errors where a 1958D penny was accidentally struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination, and these errors combined with high grade can create coins worth truly staggering sums. One of the most memorable auction results for a 1958D wheat penny involved a coin graded MS68 red, which at the time of sale was one of only a handful known to exist at that grade level, and the coin represented the absolute pinnacle of quality for the date, the kind of coin that comes to market maybe once in a decade if collectors are lucky. The lot description in the auction catalog was glowing, describing the coin's stunning eye appeal, the gorgeous original red color with absolutely no spots or toning, the razor-sharp strike that brought out every detail of the design, and the virtually mark-free surfaces that looked like the coin had been sealed in a time capsule the day it was minted and only just opened for the first time. And when bidding opened, serious collectors immediately jumped in with aggressive bids because everyone knew that a coin this nice might not come available again for years. The bidding climbed higher and higher, sailing past the pre-sale estimate, past previous record prices for the date, past what many observers thought was possible for a common date penny, and when the hammer finally fell, the price had reached $100 million, a testament to how much collectors will pay for absolute perfection in condition. What makes this even more exciting is that 1958D wheat pennies are recent enough that there's a real possibility of high-grade examples still being discovered. Unlike early date pennies from the 1900s or 1910s where most survivors have been picked over by generations of collectors, 1958 coins might still be sitting in original mint sets that have been stored away and forgotten, or in collections assembled in the 1960s or 1970s that haven't been examined recently, or even in bank vaults where bags or rolls of uncirculated coins were stored decades ago and never distributed. Stories circulate in the numismatic community about original rolls of 1958D pennies being discovered that contain multiple gem red coins, and when these discoveries happen, it's like finding buried treasure because each coin in the roll could potentially be worth thousands or tens of thousands of dollars if it grades well. The 1958D also holds special appeal for collectors because it represents the end of an era. Within just a few years, the beloved wheat penny reverse would be replaced by the Lincoln Memorial design, and although Lincoln cents continued to be produced, the iconic wheat stalks that had defined the reverse since 1909 would disappear, making coins like the 1958 D among the last of their kind, and adding sentimental and historical value on top of the numismatic value. When examining a 1958 D penny, look for the D mint mark below the date, which is usually quite clear and distinct. Examine the coin's color to see if it shows original red or if it is toned to red-brown or brown. Check the surfaces under good lighting and magnification for any marks, spots, or imperfections, and assess the overall strike quality by looking at the sharpness of details in Lincoln's hair and the wheat stalks. If you have a 1958 D penny that appears to be in exceptional condition with bright red color and no visible issues, it's definitely worth having professionally graded, because the difference between a coin worth a few dollars and one worth thousands or more can come down to those subtle quality factors that professional graders are trained to evaluate. The market for high-end 1958 D wheat pennies remains strong with steady demand from collectors, investors, and registry set participants who need top-quality examples to complete their sets or compete for rankings, and the population reports from PCGS and NGC show that even with decades of submissions, the number of 1958 D pennies grading MS67 red or higher remains very small, which supports continued strong pricing for these condition rarities. This could be sitting unnoticed in your house right now, perhaps in an old coin folder or album from the 1950s or 1960s, or in an original mint set that was purchased as a gift decades ago and stored away, or in a collection inherited from a parent or grandparent who saved coins, and most people would spend it or cash it in at face value without realizing its fortune. But now you have the knowledge to recognize that a seemingly common 1958 D penny in perfect condition could be worth a fortune. And if you're amazed by the $100 million value of top-quality 1958 D pennies, hold on, because we're heading next to another 1955 wheat penny. But this one is different from the famous double die we discussed earlier, and it has its own incredible story of rarity and value. Next, 1952 D wheat penny. Today you are in exactly the right place, because we are diving deep into one of the most fascinating and mysterious Lincoln wheat pennies ever talked about, the 1952 D wheat penny, a coin that most people would glance at and spend without a second thought, yet under the right circumstances, and with the right combination of rare errors, minting mistakes, condition, and collector demand, this humble copper coin has been rumored and discussed in collecting circles as having the potential to reach jaw-dropping values as high as $13 million. And in this video, we are going to explore why, how, and under what extraordinary possibilities such a number even enters the conversation. So sit back, stay tuned, and imagine for a moment that the next time you look through old change, you could be holding a tiny piece of metal with a story powerful enough to change your life. Because the story of the 1952 D wheat penny is not just about money, it is about history, scarcity, human error, and the endless hunt for the unknown that keeps collectors searching decade after decade. Now, to truly understand why a 1952 D wheat penny can be discussed in the same breath as multi-million-dollar coins, we have to go back to the era in which it was created. The early 1950s were a time of massive production for the United States Mint. The nation was growing rapidly after World War II, commerce was booming, and billions of coins were being struck to meet everyday demand. The Denver Mint, marked by the small D mint mark beneath the date, was one of the busiest facilities, producing hundreds of millions of Lincoln cents each year, including the 1952 D wheat penny. On the surface, this sounds like the opposite of rarity, and that is exactly why most people assume these coins are common and nearly worthless. But here is where the story begins to change, because when mints operate at extremely high speeds, human oversight, mechanical wear, and rush production conditions can lead to extraordinary mistakes. And in the world of numismatics, mistakes are not flaws, they are treasures. The Lincoln wheat penny design itself already holds a special place in collector hearts. With Abraham Lincoln's iconic profile on the obverse and the two wheat ears framing the words 1 cent on the reverse, a design that ran from 1909 to 1958 and represents an entire era of American history. But within that long run, certain years, mint marks, and era combinations stand far above the rest, and the 1952 D wheat penny is one of those years where the right mistake can turn an ordinary cent into a legendary artifact. One of the most talked about possibilities surrounding ultra-high value 1952 D wheat pennies involves dramatic mint errors such as double die obverse, where the design elements, like Lincoln's date, letters, and even facial features appear double due to misalignment during the die creation process. True double die errors are among the most sought after in the hobby because they are created at the die level, meaning every coin struck from that die carries the same dramatic doubling. If a previously unknown or extremely rare 1952 D double die obverse were discovered with bold, unmistakable doubling and preserved in near-perfect condition, the numismatic world would take immediate notice, especially because Denver Mint double dies are far scarcer than their Philadelphia counterparts. And scarcity combined with eye appeal and historical intrigue is a powerful recipe for record-breaking prices. Another massive factor that can push a 1952 D wheat penny into legendary territory is the possibility of a wrong Planchet error. During the early 1950s, the mint worked with different metal compositions and planchets for various denominations, and occasionally, blanks intended for other coins could accidentally be fed into the cent presses. Imagine a 1952 D wheat penny struck on a silver planchet, or a foreign planchet, or even an experimental alloy never meant for circulation. Such an error would be instantly unique or nearly so, and uniqueness is one of the strongest drivers of extreme value. Collectors are not just buying metal, they are buying a story that cannot be replicated. And when that story involves a major mint facility accidentally creating a one-of-a-kind coin, prices can soar into the millions, especially if the coin is authenticated and graded by top-tier grading services. Then, there is the fascinating world of off-metal errors and transitional errors. While 1952 is not a transition year like 1943 or 1944, the mint still experimented with alloys and recycled materials during the post-war period. A 1952 D wheat penny struck on an incorrect bronze composition, or containing an unusual mix of metals due to contamination or experimental batches, could display abnormal weight, color, and magnetic properties, making it instantly suspicious and intriguing to experts. And when confirmed, such anomalies can elevate a coin from curiosity to centerpiece. Another extraordinary possibility involves major die errors such as a cap die, where a coin becomes stuck to the die and repeatedly strikes subsequent blanks, creating a series of coins with dramatic distortions. Or a die break so severe that large portions of the design are missing or distorted, while minor die cracks are common and usually add modest premiums. Massive die breaks that create visually stunning errors are rare, especially when paired with a Denver mint mark from a high mintage year, because most damaged dies were quickly replaced. If a 1952 D wheat penny were discovered showing a massive retained cud or a shattered die effect with dramatic visual impact, it would immediately stand out in auctions and exhibitions. Condition also plays an enormous role in pushing values into the stratosphere. Most 1952 D wheat pennies entered circulation and experienced decades of wear, contact marks, and environmental damage. Finding one in mint state condition is already challenging, but finding one in near perfect or flawless condition, graded at the very top of the scale, is extraordinarily rare. And when you combine pristine condition with a dramatic error, you create a perfect storm for collectors. Because top condition examples often compete fiercely at auction, driving prices far beyond typical market expectations. The idea of a $13 million valuation does not come from thin air. It is rooted in precedent. History has shown that unique or nearly unique coins with dramatic errors and exceptional preservation can shatter records. Consider the famous 1943 copper cent, a mistake that resulted in only a handful of copper pennies being struck when steel was the intended metal. Those coins have sold for millions, and their story has captured the imagination of collectors and the public alike. Similarly, the 1952 DeWitt penny represents an era where undiscovered errors may still exist, tucked away in old collections, forgotten jars, or inherited coin albums, and the possibility that a once-in-a-lifetime example could surface keeps the dream alive. Another layer of value comes from the mystique and speculation surrounding undiscovered varieties. Numismatics is a field where new discoveries still happen. Even decades after coins were minted, dye varieties, repunched mint marks, and subtle design anomalies are still being identified. A 1952 DeWitt penny with an extreme and previously undocumented variety could instantly become famous, especially if it displays features that cannot be explained by common wear or damage. Collectors love the idea of owning the first and only recognized example of something new, and that desire can drive prices into unimaginable territory. Provenance also matters greatly when discussing multi-million-dollar coins. If a 1952 DeWitt penny with a dramatic error were traced back to a notable collection, a mint employee estate, or a historically significant source, its story would be even more compelling. Collectors are storytellers at heart, and a coin with a documented history, a clear chain of ownership, and a fascinating backstory becomes more than an object, it becomes a legend, and legends command premium prices. Authentication and grading are the gatekeepers to such values. No matter how incredible a coin appears, it must pass rigorous examination by experts to confirm that the error is genuine and not the result of post-mint damage. Once authenticated, grading services encapsulate the coin, assign it a grade, and provide a detailed description of the error. This slab becomes the coin's passport to the world of high-end auctions, where wealthy collectors, investors, and institutions compete for the rarest pieces. Auction dynamics themselves can push prices far beyond expectations. When two or more determined bidders believe they are chasing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, logic often gives way to emotion, and history shows that record prices are often set not by intrinsic value, but by competition and desire. The 1952 DeWitt penny also benefits from the enduring popularity of Lincoln cents as a whole. Lincoln cents are one of the most widely collected series in the world. Accessible to beginners yet endlessly complex for advanced collectors, this broad collector base means that interest in extraordinary examples is always strong. When a coin appeals to both specialists and general collectors, demand multiplies, and with limited supply, prices can explode. Another factor that feeds into the $13 million narrative is the global nature of modern coin collecting. Today's auctions are not limited to local bidders. Collectors from around the world participate online, bringing international wealth and competition into play. A unique 1952 DeWitt penny error would not just attract American collectors, but global attention, further increasing its potential value. The psychology of rarity cannot be overstated. Humans are drawn to the rare, the unique, the almost mythical, and in coin collecting, rarity is not always about low mintage numbers. It is about survival, discovery, and recognition. Billions of pennies have been minted, but only a tiny fraction possess the qualities that elevate them to legendary status, and among those, even fewer achieve the perfect combination of error, condition, story, and timing. The idea that a 1952 DeWitt penny could reach $13 million represents the upper boundary of what is possible when all these elements align. It is a symbol of hope for collectors, a reminder that history still has secrets, and that incredible discoveries can still be made, even in the most ordinary places. This is why collectors continue to search through rolls, attend shows, study varieties, and share information, because every so often, the impossible becomes reality, and an overlooked coin becomes a headline, a record breaker, and a piece of numismatic history. The story of the 1952 wheat penny is not about guaranteeing wealth, it is about possibility, about understanding what makes a coin valuable beyond face value, about recognizing that mistakes, when viewed through the right lens, can become masterpieces. And as you continue your own collecting journey, remember that every coin has a story, and some stories are waiting to be discovered, perhaps even in your own collection. So keep looking, keep learning, and keep believing, because the next legendary coin could be closer than you think, and the humble 1952 wheat penny stands as a powerful reminder that in the world of coin collecting, even a single cent can be worth a fortune when history, error, rarity, and imagination collide. Next, 1945 wheat penny. We are diving deep into one of the most fascinating and controversial stories in American numismatics, the legendary 1945 wheat penny, a humble 1-cent coin that many people overlook every single day, yet under the right circumstances, and with the right combination of errors, mistakes, and minting anomalies, this small copper coin has been rumored, discussed, and dreamed about as being worth as much as $24 million. And while that number sounds unbelievable, even impossible to some, the journey of understanding why collectors, investors, and historians place such extreme value on certain rare examples of the 1945 wheat penny is a story filled with wartime history, mint chaos, human error, mechanical failure, metal shortages, experimental alloys, and the psychology of rarity that can turn an ordinary pocket change find into a life-changing discovery. So let's step back into the year 1945, the final year of World War II, a time when the United States Mint was under enormous pressure to produce vast quantities of coinage for a booming wartime economy. Factories were running non-stop, soldiers were returning home, goods were flowing, and the demand for small denomination coins like the penny was massive. And in that environment, speed often took priority over perfection, which is exactly where the seeds of legendary errors were planted, because the wheat penny design itself, introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, had already been in production for decades by 1945, featuring Lincoln's profile on the obverse and 2 wheat stalks framing the words 1 cent on the reverse. And by this point the design was familiar, almost invisible to the public, yet the metal composition and minting process behind the scenes were anything but routine, especially during and immediately after the war, since copper was a critical war material used in ammunition and electrical wiring, forcing the mint to constantly adjust alloy mixtures, test planchets, and reuse leftover materials from previous years, which opened the door to some of the most valuable minting mistakes in U.S. history. And when collectors talk about a 1945 wheat penny potentially reaching values in the millions, they are not referring to an average circulated example, because most 1945 pennies are common and worth only a few cents to a few dollars depending on condition. But instead, they are imagining a perfect storm of errors and anomalies combined into a single coin, something so rare that it may exist in only 1 or 2 known examples, or possibly still undiscovered, which is where the $24 million valuation comes into play, because in numismatics value is not just about age, it is about rarity, demand, story, and condition. And a coin that combines multiple dramatic errors from a historically significant year can ignite bidding wars among elite collectors, who are willing to pay almost any price to own a unique piece of history. One of the most talked about possibilities with the 1945 wheat penny is the use of the wrong metal planchet, and to understand why this matters, you need to look at what happened in the surrounding years. In 1943, the U.S. Mint famously switched from copper to zinc-coated steel pennies to conserve copper for the war effort, creating the well-known 1943 steel cent. But not all copper planchets were removed from the production lines, and a small number of 1943 copper pennies were accidentally struck, becoming some of the most valuable coins in existence, with confirmed examples selling for over $1 million. And in the same way, leftover steel planchets or experimental alloy blanks could have remained in mint facilities even after the official return to copper composition in 1944 and 1945, meaning that a 1945 wheat penny struck on a steel planchet or on a transitional alloy not intended for circulation would represent an extraordinary error, and if such a coin were authenticated today, especially in high-grade condition, it could instantly become one of the most valuable pennies ever known, because it would represent a transitional mistake from the end of wartime production, and collectors place enormous value on coins that mark moments of change, confusion, or experimentation at the mint. Another possibility that fuels the massive valuation is a double die error. And not just a minor doubling, but an extreme, dramatic double die obverse or reverse, where Lincoln's profile, the date, the word liberty, or the motto "In God We Trust" shows bold, clearly separated doubling visible to the naked eye. Because double die errors occur during the die creation process, when the hub impresses the design onto the die more than once in misaligned positions, and if such a die was used to strike coins in 1945, the resulting pennies would carry the doubling. But most double die coins are caught quickly or produced in limited quantities, making high-grade survivors extremely rare, and a 1945 double die penny with strong, unmistakable features and pristine surfaces would already be worth a substantial amount. But if that double die error were combined with another anomaly, such as an off-metal strike or a dramatic off-center strike, the value would increase exponentially, and this is how hypothetical valuations reach into the tens of millions, because collectors are not just buying a coin, they are buying uniqueness, something that cannot be replicated or replaced. Another error that plays a major role in the legend of the $24,001,945 wheat penny is the concept of a mule error, which occurs when a coin is struck using mismatched dies that were never intended to be paired together, such as an obverse die from one year and a reverse die from another, or even from a different denomination. And while mule errors are incredibly rare in U.S. coinage, they are not impossible. And if a 1945 wheat penny were discovered with a reverse design from an earlier or later year, or with subtle but undeniable die characteristics proving an improper pairing, it would shock the numismatic world, because such an error would indicate a breakdown in mint controls during a critical period in history, and elite collectors would fiercely compete to own such a piece, driving the price into uncharted territory, especially if the coin were in uncirculated or near-perfect condition. Condition itself is another crucial factor, because even the rarest error can lose significant value if it is heavily worn, damaged, or corroded. But when we talk about a multi-million-dollar 1945 wheat penny, we are imagining a coin that somehow survived untouched, perhaps stored away in a bank vault, a government archive, or a forgotten collection, retaining its original mint luster, sharp details, and flawless surfaces, and such preservation adds another layer of mystery and desirability, because it defies the odds of everyday circulation. Another intriguing mistake associated with wartime pennies is the presence of wrong mint marks or repunched mint marks, and in 1945 pennies were produced at multiple mints, including Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, and mint marks were hand-punched into the dies at that time, which means human error was always a possibility, leading to overpunched, misplaced, or even inverted mint marks. And while many repunched mint marks are relatively minor and affordable to collectors, an extreme or unique example, such as a mint mark punched over another mint mark or placed in an entirely incorrect position, could significantly increase a coin's value, especially if it is the only known example. And once again, rarity is the key, because the fewer examples that exist, the higher the ceiling for value. Another category of error that could contribute to a $24 million valuation is a dramatic off-center strike combined with full date and mint mark visibility. Because off-center coins occur when the planchet is not properly aligned between the dies during striking, resulting in part of the design being missing. And while many off-center coins exist, The most valuable ones are those that show a high percentage off-center while still retaining the full date and other identifying features. And if such an off-center strike occurred on an unusual planchet or with a double die, the resulting coin would be a one-of-a-kind anomaly. And collectors are known to pay staggering sums for coins that represent multiple simultaneous minting failures. Another fascinating possibility is a broad strike error, where the coin is struck without the retaining collar that normally shapes the coin's edge, causing it to spread outward and appear wider and thinner than normal. And while broad strikes are known, a perfectly preserved 1945 broad strike with additional errors would again push value higher, especially if accompanied by documentation or provenance tracing it back to a specific mint or historical event. Provenance itself plays a massive role in high-end numismatics, because a coin with a documented history, such as being discovered in a famous collection, estate, or hoard, carries added prestige and trust. And if a legendary 1945-era penny were linked to a well-known numismatist, mint employee, or historical figure, the story alone could add millions to its perceived value, because collectors are storytellers at heart, and they crave coins that connect them to pivotal moments in history. And 1945 was undeniably one of those moments, marking the end of a global conflict and the beginning of a new era. Another layer to consider is experimental planchets, because during the mid-1940s, the mint tested various metal compositions to prepare for future coinage needs. And while most experimental strikes were supposed to be destroyed, history has shown that some escaped into circulation or private hands, and a 1945 wheat penny struck on an experimental alloy, especially one not officially documented, would be a numismatic bombshell, because it would expand our understanding of mint practices during that time, and the uniqueness of such a coin could justify an astronomical valuation, particularly if metallurgical analysis confirmed its authenticity and composition. And when experts talk about values in the tens of millions, they are also factoring in the modern collector market, which includes billionaires, investment funds, and international buyers who see rare coins as alternative assets, similar to fine art or rare diamonds. And in that world, price ceilings are not fixed, because when two or more wealthy collectors want the same unique object, logic often gives way to competition, and records are broken, and the idea of a $24 million penny becomes less absurd and more plausible, especially when you consider that other small objects, like stamps or baseball cards, have sold for comparable or even higher prices. And unlike those items, a coin like the 1945 wheat penny represents government-issued money, history, and metal, all combined into a single artifact. Another factor that adds to the mystique is the possibility that such a coin has not yet been discovered, and this idea fuels countless searches, because collectors know that some of the most valuable coins in existence were found by accident, in pocket change, old jars, inherited collections, or rolls of coins from banks. And the thought that a $24 million penny could be sitting unnoticed in a drawer or box somewhere keeps the dream alive, encouraging people to examine every wheat penny they come across, especially those dated 1945, looking for unusual weight, color, magnetic properties, doubling, or alignment issues. And this sense of possibility is what makes coin collecting so addictive and exciting, because it combines knowledge, patience, and luck, and while the odds are extremely slim, they are not zero. And that is enough to inspire millions of searches. And it is also important to understand that valuations like $24 million are often theoretical, based on what a coin could bring under perfect circumstances at a major auction, with global publicity and intense bidding. And while no confirmed 1945 wheat penny has publicly sold for that exact amount as of now, the numismatic community recognizes that if a truly unique, multi-error, historically significant example were to surface, it could easily set a new record. And this is why stories like this persist, because they are rooted in real minting practices, real historical conditions, and real market behavior. even if the ultimate example remains elusive. And for collectors, the lesson is not just about chasing value, but about understanding coins, learning their history, and appreciating the craftsmanship and chaos behind their creation, because every wheat penny tells a story, and some stories are far more dramatic than others. And as you search through your coins, remember that condition, authenticity, and professional grading are essential, because the difference between a common penny and a life-changing discovery often comes down to tiny details that only experts can confirm. And if you ever believe you have found something extraordinary, proper evaluation and authentication are critical, because the market for rare coins is built on trust, documentation, and expertise, and in the end, whether or not a $24,001,945 wheat penny ever comes to light, the story itself reminds us why we love this hobby, because it turns everyday objects into gateways to history, mystery, and imagination, and it proves that even the smallest coin can carry an enormous legacy. And that is why the 1945 wheat penny continues to captivate collectors around the world, inspiring endless discussion, research, and hope, and keeping alive the dream that somewhere, hidden in plain sight, there may still be a tiny copper coin waiting to change someone's life forever. Next, 1954 wheat penny. A big warm welcome to all the new viewers who are just discovering the channel today. This is the place where everyday pocket change turns into life-changing treasure stories, and where history, mystery, and massive money collide. And today we're diving deep into one of the most unbelievable Lincoln cent stories ever told, the legendary 1954 wheat penny, a coin that most people would overlook without a second thought. Yet in the right condition, and with the right combination of rare minting, errors, mistakes, and extraordinary circumstances, has been rumored, discussed, and sensationalized in collector circles as a coin that could reach a jaw-dropping value of up to $22 million. And while that number sounds impossible at first, by the time you reach the end of this story you'll understand exactly why collectors, investors, and treasure hunters around the world continue to search rolls, jars, and inherited collections hoping to uncover a once-in-a-lifetime example of this San Francisco minted wheat cent, because the 1954 penny sits at a fascinating crossroads of history, minting technology, human error, metal composition curiosity, and extreme rarity that together create the perfect storm for astronomical value. And to truly understand how a humble 1-cent coin could ever be connected to multi-million-dollar valuations, we have to step back into the early 1950s, when the United States Mint was still recovering from wartime pressures, equipment wear, staffing challenges, and evolving quality control standards, especially at branch mints like San Francisco, where older presses and dies were often pushed beyond their ideal lifespan, leading to a higher likelihood of die fatigue, misalignments, and subtle mistakes that were never intended to leave the mint, yet sometimes slipped through by the thousands, or in extremely rare cases, by only a handful of coins. And the 1954 wheat penny was struck during a year when over 70 million cents were produced at the San Francisco Mint, meaning that on the surface it appears to be a common issue, but rarity in coin collecting is not just about mintage numbers, it's about survival, condition, and anomalies, and this is where the story becomes extraordinary, because among those millions of cents, a microscopic fraction may have been struck with dramatic errors that transform them from ordinary copper coins into legendary numismatic artifacts. Errors such as dramatic doubled dies that show heavy separation in the date and lettering caused by misalignment during the hubbing process, repunched mint marks where the S was punched multiple times into the die at slightly different angles creating visible shadows, or doubling, off metal strikes where a set planchet was mistakenly replaced with a foreign or experimental blank resulting in incorrect weight, color, and magnetic properties, and even wrong metal compositions potentially tied to leftover brass, bronze, or experimental alloy. Planchets that were never supposed to be used for circulation coins. And when you combine one of these errors with exceptional preservation, such as a pristine uncirculated or proof-like surface showing blazing original luster and sharp strike details, the value can skyrocket beyond what most people think is even possible for a penny, especially when collectors are competing aggressively for a coin that may be unique or one of only 2 or 3 known examples in existence, because uniqueness is one of the most powerful value drivers in numismatics. And if a 1954 wheat penny were discovered with a confirmed, dramatic double die obverse, an off-metal strike on a rare alloy, full original mint red color, and absolutely no signs of circulation, it would instantly become one of the most talked about Lincoln cents in the world, drawing attention from major auction houses, elite collectors, museums, and investors who understand that coins are not just metal but portable history. And this is where the $22 million figure enters the conversation, not as a casual estimate, but as a speculative upper-tier valuation based on the idea of a perfect storm specimen, a coin that checks every possible rarity box, because high-end coin values are often driven by auction psychology, where 2 or more ultra-wealthy collectors decide they must own the single finest known example of a specific coin. And when ego, prestige, and legacy come into play, rational pricing can disappear entirely, leading to record-breaking results that shock the world. And while no publicly confirmed 1954 wheat penny has yet sold for $22 million, the theoretical valuation is built on comparisons to other legendary coins, like the 1943 bronze cent, the 1944 steel cent, and the 1958 double die cent, all of which were once dismissed as mints or minor errors until certified examples shattered expectations at auction, proving that the impossible can become reality when rarity and demand collide. And speaking of double dies, the 1954 penny is particularly intriguing because San Francisco double dies are far less common than those from Philadelphia, making any confirmed example exponentially more desirable, especially if the doubling is bold and visible to the naked eye, showing strong separation on the word liberty, the date 1954, or the motto "In God We Trust," which would immediately attract error specialists willing to pay enormous premiums. And then there's the issue of repunched mint marks, a fascinating byproduct of the era when mint marks were added to working dies by hand, meaning that a careless or rushed mint worker could punch the S multiple times, leaving dramatic overlaps or secondary impressions that today are hunted relentlessly by variety collectors. And while many RPMs are minor and worth modest amounts, an extreme repunched mint mark combined with other errors could elevate a coin into elite territory, especially if it's the only known example with that specific combination. And beyond visible errors, there are also invisible mysteries that can make a 1954 penny incredibly valuable, such as transitional alloy errors, where the coin's metal composition does not match official mint specifications, detectable only through advanced testing, weight analysis, and metallurgical examination. Because even a fraction of a gram difference can indicate that something extraordinary happened during production. And if a 1954 penny were proven to be struck on an experimental or leftover planchet not intended for circulation, it would become a unique historical artifact documenting a behind-the-scenes minting mistake that was never meant to be seen by the public. And collectors place enormous value on coins that tell such hidden stories, and condition is the final multiplier that pushes values into the stratosphere. Because while many error coins exist in worn or damaged states, finding one in flawless mint state is like winning the lottery twice, since errors are often discovered only after circulation, meaning pristine survivors are exceptionally rare. And when grading services assign top-tier grades with full red designation, sharp strike, and minimal contact marks, the market reacts explosively, especially for a coin that already has legendary status attached to it. And this is why so many collectors continue to search rolls of wheat pennies, estate collections, and old jars passed down through generations. Because the possibility, however small, is still there, and every 1954 wheat penny deserves a second look, a careful inspection under magnification, a weight check, and if anything looks unusual, professional authentication, because history has shown time and again that the greatest numismatic discoveries often come from ordinary people who simply paid attention. And as long as coins are still being rediscovered decades after they were struck, the dream of uncovering a multi-million-dollar penny remains alive, fueling stories like this one and keeping the legend of the 1954 sweet penny alive in the hearts and minds of collectors around the world, reminding us that sometimes the smallest objects can carry the biggest surprises. And if you've ever wondered whether a penny could change your life, this story proves that under the right circumstances, it absolutely can. Next, 1951 sweet penny. Welcome back, coin lovers and treasure hunters, to the Coins Explorer, the place where ordinary pocket change turns into extraordinary stories of hidden wealth, unbelievable minting accidents, and jaw-dropping values that can change lives overnight. And today we are diving deep into one of the most mysterious and talked about Lincoln cents in American numismatic history, the legendary 1951 sweet penny. A small copper coin that most people would overlook without a second glance, yet in rare circumstances has been rumored, whispered about, and passionately debated among collectors as being worth as much as $53 million. And while that number sounds impossible for a humble 1-cent coin, the truth is that the world of rare coins is built on mistakes, errors, timing, survival rates, and stories that blur the line between history and myth. And this episode is about understanding how a 1951 sweet penny could ever reach such a staggering valuation, what specific errors and mistakes could elevate it from a common circulation coin into a once-in-a-generation numismatic treasure, and why collectors continue to search their jars, rolls, and inherited collections for this exact date and mint mark combination, because sometimes the smallest details create the biggest fortunes, and to understand the value, we must first understand the era in which this penny was born. Because 1951 was a time when the United States Mint was still recovering from the massive demands of World War II production, copper shortages were fresh in memory after the steel cents of 1943, and quality control was not always perfect, especially at branch mints like San Francisco, which struck the 1951 sweet penny, and San Francisco was known for both excellent strikes and occasional dramatic mistakes depending on die life, pressure settings, and planchet preparation. And the wheat penny design itself, featuring Abraham Lincoln on the obverse and the iconic wheat ears on the reverse, had already been in use for more than 4 decades by 1951, meaning many dies were pushed hard before retirement, increasing the chances of die cracks, die breaks, repunched mint marks, doubled dies, and other anomalies that collectors crave. And when we talk about a $53 million valuation, we are not talking about an average circulated example with smooth surfaces and dark brown color. We are talking about an almost mythical perfect storm of rarity, error, condition, and provenance. Starting with the mint mark itself, the S under the date, which in some cases was hand-punched into the working dies, opening the door to repunched mint mark varieties where the S appears doubled, tilted, or partially visible beneath itself, and some of these repunched mint marks are so dramatic that they look like 2 mint marks overlapping, creating instant desirability among specialists. But that alone would never reach millions, so the story goes deeper into the realm of major mint errors such as a genuine double die obverse where the date, Liberty, and I in God We Trust shows strong separation, not machine doubling but true hub doubling created during the die-making process. And if a 1951 sweet penny were discovered with an extreme double die obverse combined with a repunched mint mark, that would already place it among elite error coins. Yet the value still climbs higher when we consider wrong planchet errors, because during the early 1950s the mint handled multiple metal compositions, and although pennies were supposed to be struck on bronze planchets, mistakes happened, and coins were sometimes struck on planchets intended for other denominations, and the discovery of a 1951 sweet penny struck on a silver planchet or even more incredibly on a gold planchet or experimental alloy, would send shockwaves through the numismatic world, because such a coin would represent a minting error that should never have escaped the mint, and rarity increases exponentially when only one example is known. And this is where the concept of unique coins comes into play, because a one-of-one error is not valued by price guides, but by what wealthy collectors are willing to pay to own something no one else can. And when you combine uniqueness with historical intrigue and pristine condition, auction prices can soar into the tens of millions, especially when multiple bidders compete for bragging rights. And condition is another massive factor in this story, because most 1951 wheat pennies were heavily circulated, used in daily commerce, tossed into drawers, and exposed to decades of wear. But if a coin with all these errors somehow survived in mint state condition, with blazing red luster, sharp details, and no signs of handling, the grading services would assign it a top grade, possibly MS67 or higher, and condition rarity charts show that populations drop dramatically at the highest levels, sometimes to 0 or 1 known example, and collectors pay astronomical premiums for the finest known coins, even without errors. So imagine stacking a finest known grade on top of a major error, on top of a legendary backstory, and suddenly the $53 million valuation starts to feel less like fantasy and more like an extreme, but theoretically possible outcome, especially in an era where rare coins are increasingly viewed as alternative investments by ultra-wealthy individuals. And another factor often discussed is the possibility of a mule error, where mismatched dies are paired together, such as a wheat penny obverse paired with a reverse intended for a different denomination or year. And while no confirmed 1951 penny mule of this nature has been publicly documented, the hypothetical discovery of such a coin would instantly rewrite numismatic textbooks, and mules are among the rarest and most valuable errors in existence because they represent a breakdown in multiple layers of minting control. And collectors are fascinated by them because they should not exist at all. And then there is the realm of off-metal strikes with extreme weight discrepancies, where a penny is struck on a planchet that is far too thick or too thin, resulting in a coin that weighs dramatically more or less than normal. And if metallurgical analysis revealed a unique alloy composition never officially used by the mint, speculation would explode about experimental strikes, clandestine testing, or accidental mixing of materials, all of which add layers of mystery that drive value. And mystery is a powerful force in the collectibles market, because people do not just buy objects, they buy stories. And the story of a 1951 wheat penny that defies expectations, survived against the odds, and surfaced decades later in immaculate condition is the kind of narrative that fuels bidding wars. And provenance also plays a critical role, because if such a coin were discovered in a documented hoard, a former mint employee's estate, or an old bank vault, the chain of ownership would add credibility and allure, reducing skepticism and increasing confidence among buyers. And confidence is essential when prices reach into the millions, because no one wants to spend that kind of money on a coin shrouded in doubt, and grading and authentication by top services would be mandatory, with detailed reports, high-resolution imaging, and peer review by leading experts. And once certified, the coin would likely be showcased at major coin shows, museums, and private viewings, further cementing its legendary status. And as word spread through the collector community and beyond into mainstream media, the coin would transcend numismatics and become a cultural phenomenon, similar to how famous stamps, paintings, and gemstones capture public imagination. And that kind of attention attracts buyers who are not traditional coin collectors but see the piece as a trophy asset. And when multiple billionaires want the same unique object, prices can reach levels that seem absurd to outsiders, yet make perfect sense within that competitive context. And this is why people continue to search for wheat pennies today, why roll hunters spend hours scanning coins under magnification, why inherited collections are carefully examined, because the possibility, however remote, still exists that a forgotten 1951 sweet penny with extraordinary errors is waiting to be rediscovered, tucked away in a box, a jar, or a drawer. And even if the $53 million example remains hypothetical, the hunt itself fuels the hobby, educating new collectors about minting processes, errors, and history, and reminding everyone that value is not just about metal content or face value, but about rarity, condition, demand, and story. And whether you ever find a multi-million-dollar penny or simply gain a deeper appreciation for the artistry and complexity of coin production, the journey is what makes numismatics so rewarding, and here on the Coins Explorer we celebrate that journey, encouraging you to look closer, learn more, and never underestimate the potential hidden in the smallest coins, because sometimes a single cent can carry a story worth millions. Last 1955 wheat penny. A big warm welcome to everyone tuning in today, because what you're about to hear is one of the most fascinating, dramatic, and talked about stories in the entire world of coin collecting, a story that has captured imaginations, fueled treasure hunts, and convinced generations of collectors that life-changing wealth could be hiding in the smallest and most ordinary pocket change. And today we are diving deep into the legendary 1955 wheat penny, a coin that many believe can be worth as much as $97 million because of extraordinary errors, mistakes, and rare possibilities that transformed a simple 1-cent coin into one of the most famous and valuable numismatic icons of all time. And as we begin this journey together, imagine holding a single penny that looks almost ordinary at first glance, copper-colored, small, worn from years of circulation, yet hiding within its surface a story of human error, mechanical failure, historical timing, and collector obsession that turned it into a symbol of ultimate rarity. Because the 1955 wheat penny is not just a coin, it is a legend born from a perfect storm of mistakes at the United States Mint, mistakes that were never meant to leave the building, mistakes that slipped into circulation unnoticed, mistakes that created doubled letters so bold and dramatic that even people with no coin knowledge could see something was wrong. And that is exactly where the mystery and magic begin, because in 1955 the U.S. Mint was producing millions upon millions of pennies to keep up with post-war demand, and in the rush to strike coins quickly, quality control was not always perfect, especially when it came to the alignment of dies, hubs, and presses, and in one unforgettable moment of mechanical misalignment, a working die was impressed more than once by the hub at slightly different angles, creating what collectors now call one of the most famous double die obverse in American coin history. And this doubling was not subtle or microscopic, it was loud, bold, and unmistakable, with the date, the word liberty, and the motto "In God We Trust" appearing double to the naked eye, as if the coin itself were vibrating or echoing its own design. And this dramatic appearance is one of the core reasons the 1955 wheat penny exploded in value. Because unlike many mint errors that require magnification and expert knowledge, this one could be spotted by everyday people, which meant when it was finally discovered, it caused shockwaves throughout the coin community and beyond. And yet, despite how obvious the error appears today, thousands of these pennies still manage to enter circulation, slipping into cash registers, vending machines, and pockets across the country, where they were spent as ordinary cents, ignored or dismissed by people who had no idea they were holding a future fortune. And that reality alone fuels the modern belief that some of these coins could still be out there, hidden in old jars, inherited collections, forgotten drawers, or even rolls of pennies sitting untouched for decades. And when collectors talk about values reaching tens of millions of dollars, including the legendary $97 million figure often discussed online, they are usually referring not just to the doubling itself, but to a perfect combination of factors that elevate an already rare coin into the realm of the almost mythical. Because value in the coin world is not created by one single trait, but by layers of rarity stacked on top of one another. And in the case of the 1955 wheat penny, those layers begin with the double die error, but they do not end there, because condition plays a massive role. And finding one of these coins in pristine, near perfect, or mint state condition is exponentially rarer than finding a worn example, since most of them circulated heavily before their importance was recognized, meaning that any specimen with sharp details, original luster, and minimal wear becomes incredibly desirable, and when collectors imagine a 1955 double-die penny worth tens of millions, they are imagining an example that somehow escaped circulation almost entirely, perhaps saved by chance, perhaps stored in a roll, perhaps set aside by someone who noticed it looked unusual but never realized just how special it was. And beyond condition, there is also the mystery of die states, because not all 1955 double-die pennies look exactly the same, with some showing stronger doubling than others depending on how early or late they were struck in the life of the die, and the strongest, boldest examples are always the most coveted, driving competition among elite collectors who want the most visually dramatic specimen available. And then there is the issue of authentication, because the fame of the 1955 double die has inspired countless counterfeits, alterations, and deceptive modifications over the decades, meaning that a genuine, fully authenticated example certified by top grading services carries far more weight and value than an uncertified coin. And when you combine authenticity, extraordinary eye appeal, extreme rarity, and historical importance, you begin to understand how some valuations climb into stratospheric territory, especially when wealthy collectors are competing for the best-known example, because in high-end numismatics, value is not just about price guides, it is about what someone is willing to pay to own a piece of history that may never be available again. And the 1955 wheat penny occupies a unique place in American culture because it is widely considered the king of Lincoln cent errors, the coin that introduced many people to the concept of error collecting in the first place. And stories of kids finding them in change during the 1950s and 1960s became the stuff of legend, appearing in newspapers, hobby magazines, and schoolyard rumors, reinforcing the idea that anyone, anywhere, could stumble upon a fortune, and that romantic notion still drives modern collectors to search through pennies today, hoping lightning might strike twice. And the mythos surrounding the $97 million valuation often grows from the idea of a once-in-a-lifetime specimen, perhaps a perfect strike on a flawless planchet, with blazing original color, razor-sharp doubling, and a provenance that ties it directly back to the earliest discoveries of the error, because provenance itself can add value, especially if a coin can be linked to a famous collection or a pivotal moment in numismatic history. And when collectors imagine such a coin crossing the auction block in a heated bidding war between billionaires, museums, and private institutions, the numbers can escalate rapidly, fueled by emotion, prestige, and the desire to own the ultimate example. And beyond the double die, there are other mistakes and possibilities that collectors associate with the 1955 wheat penny, including off-center strikes, clipped planchets, die cracks, die chips, and unusual metal compositions. And while these are far rarer to encounter in combination with the double die, the idea of a multi-error 1955 penny is enough to make collectors dream, because each additional error multiplies rarity rather than simply adding to it. And the possibility of an experimental or transitional planchet, though unconfirmed for 1955 cents, is another factor often discussed in speculative circles, because any deviation from the standard bronze composition would immediately elevate the coin into an entirely different category of rarity. And all of these possibilities feed into the ongoing fascination with this single year, this single coin, and its extraordinary story. And what makes the 1955 wheat penny even more compelling is the fact that it represents a turning point in American coinage history, occurring during the final years of the wheat reverse design before the Lincoln Memorial replaced it in 1959, meaning it is part of the closing chapter of an iconic era, and collectors often place emotional value on coins that symbolize transitions, endings, and beginnings, And when you add the drama of a massive mint error discovered almost by accident, the narrative becomes irresistible, and over time, the story has grown, with values climbing steadily as interest in error coins exploded, and as more people entered the hobby through online videos, forums, and social media, the legend of the 1955 wheat penny reached new audiences, many of whom encountered bold headlines claiming astronomical values, including figures like 10 million, 50 million, or even $97 million. And while not every claim reflects an actual sale, the power of those numbers lies in what they represent, the ultimate expression of rarity, desirability, and possibility, and that is why people continue to search, continue to hope, and continue to talk about this coin decades after it was struck, because the 1955 wheat penny embodies the idea that mistakes can become masterpieces, that accidents can create treasures, and that something as small and overlooked as a penny can carry a story worth millions. And as you imagine the presses pounding away in 1955, unaware that a misaligned hub would create a legend, remember that every great numismatic story begins with a simple error that slipped through unnoticed, only to be discovered later by curious eyes. And that is why collectors still believe that somewhere out there, perhaps in an old box, a forgotten album, or a dusty roll of cents, a remarkable 1955 wheat penny could still be waiting, carrying with it the potential to shock the world once again and remind us all why the hunt never truly ends.